Well, when Biden first came out with this student loan forgiveness handout, it was wildly unpopular, unless, of course, you were the student with the loan debt. And I thought to myself, well, he's got to run it through Congress. And I was watching, and he said he did. As a matter of fact, there was a side note, something to the effect, well, yeah. I think we got it by 1 or 2 votes. Well, okay. But then we find out he didn't run it through Congress at all. And, of course, people were up in arms about this, and rightfully so. So I told you, hey, we've already got 1, 2, 3 different court cases going on. It's being litigated. You know, watch yourself. Don't get played here. So now it's no longer a college loan handout, but the administration wants to make it easier for student loan borrowers to get rid of this debt in bankruptcy. They announced yesterday updated guidelines that'll make it easier for those with student debt to discharge it in bankruptcy. That the new bankruptcy policy, I guess, comes from the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education. It allows federal student loan borrowers to prove that they're experiencing financial distress. Have you looked around? Have you seen the economy? Everybody is. Sorry, a bit cynical. And they need a fresh start. Under the rules, the agencies may recommend that a bankruptcy judge discharge a borrower's student debt if they find their case warrants it. Currently, it's difficult, if not impossible, for someone to walk away from their federal student debt in a normal bankruptcy proceeding. I don't know how this is going to shake out. Reed Allmand, a Board Certified Consumer Bankruptcy attorney, is with me. Mr. Allmand, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
When people say it's almost impossible to walk away from a federal student loan debt, I understand that. I guess I don't understand. Everybody is struggling in this economy with inflation at a 40-year high and gas prices doubled from 2 years ago. Everybody's struggling. So I guess I'm trying to ask, what's the genesis for this?
Well, I think the genesis is the climate, the political climate and the plight and the pandemic and the effect that it's had on everybody's finances. The process to start lobbying for this change, started several years ago with the Department of Education, making suggestions and recommendations to the Department of Justice to ease the standards, for the prosecution of discharging student loans through bankruptcy.
Yeah. Okay. All right. This whole idea of bailing out or handing out money to student loan debt was wildly unpopular with people. I mean, some people that would be on the hook with tax dollars couldn't even afford to put their own kids through college or even help. It seemed to fly in the face of everything that made sense. And I guess around, 250,000 student loan debtors file for bankruptcy each year. But I guess only 100, 200, 300 walk away from their education debt. Is this something we need to be pursuing, or maybe an extension on the time you can pay it back? What do you think?
I think bankruptcy is a uniquely, qualified setting to deal with this because we're already experienced in discussing people's income and expenses and determining if they're eligible for relief. The bankruptcy code does not allow student loans to be discharged unless the debtor is able to prove that there's an undue hardship. And so with these new guidelines, there's better guidance on how the Department of Justice is going to apply the undue hardship test.
Well, when you say new guidelines, can you give me an example?
Sure. So previous to the announcement yesterday, there was a case called the Bruner test, and it's a 3-pronged test that has been used to define what is an undue hardship. And so the prongs of those tests is, first, you had to show a current financial hardship. Second, you had to show that that hardship is going to most likely continue indefinitely into the future. And three, you had to show that you acted with good faith to try to discharge those debts. That sounds reasonable, but in practice, the Department of Justice has fought all those efforts by debtors and debtors counsel to attempt to qualify under that test. And the case law and the standards make it virtually impossible to actually get somebody to qualify under those three prongs. Now, with the new guidelines, they're providing objective reasons and ways that people can fall into those tests and get those satisfied, which is much more relaxed than what has previously been established by case law.
So basically, in layman's perspective, it's made it easier to get out from underneath this loan debt.
Absolutely. Much easier.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of Americans say, hey, I could probably qualify for all kinds of things, but it's one of those things. If you said you're going to do something, you try to do it. I can see extending the time it takes to pay the loan back. I can't see wiping it out with a government handout or bankruptcy. That seems to go. That seems to run counter to everything we do in this country.
You really have to just get to know the individual consumers that I interface with and the facts in their cases. There's many people who, had good intentions of starting their education and were not able to finish their degree. They have disabilities or they have children with disabilities, and they've made every effort to try to pay back on those loans, and they're just not ever going to be able to do it. And so I think in those situations, it is justified, to provide a mechanism through a court system for them to prove their hardship and to be able to get that debt removed.
Yeah, there's always an exception to every rule, and I certainly understand and give you that. I guess this coming on the heels of what many viewed to be a federal handout to people that, took out a loan and got a degree. In many cases, they did get a degree. Don't know if it helped them or not. But when they couldn't get that done, then all of a sudden now, we'll make it easier to discharge that debt in bankruptcy. I think had they not started with a federal handout, of course they needed that for the election, but if they'd not started there, but started here instead, I don't think there'd be as much pushback by the American people.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that, the taxpayers, don't want to have to pay for other people's bad choices, whether it was in their control or not. But I do agree with you. This is very different than the original plan of just basically allowing people with under a certain amount of student loans just to get them wiped out.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Yeah, they're going to have to file a bankruptcy case, and then within that bankruptcy case, they're going to have to file a lawsuit called an adversary proceeding and prove up their eligibility. So at least it is going to provide, an organized, systematic way of only giving this relief to people who really need it.
Yeah, well, again, if somebody is, infirmed in some way or, something horrific has happened during the time they were, completing their education. Yeah, like I said, without going into each individual detail, there are always exceptions to every rule. But as soon as the federal government gets a hold of it, it immediately, in the blink of an eye, becomes less efficient and more expensive. And I think most people realize that. And this coming on the heels of a government handout to some people that got their degrees, letting other people pay that off just doesn't set well with people. And I think that's why there's so much pushback on this.
Well, I definitely agree with you. I know that it's obviously very controversial, and some people are very opposed. It's not really much different than the feedback that I often hear from people who have the perception, that people are filing for bankruptcy are, trying to cheat the system or pull a fast one. But after doing it for 20 years and meeting all these people, I can tell you, pride comes before the fall, and you're not always in control of what happens to you. And so, it's good to give people some grace.
Reed Allmand, a board certified consumer bankruptcy attorney.